Sometimes in your columns, what you write for The Guardian, you're a bit of a miseryguts, if you don't mind me saying so, George. And that's all right.
Only sometimes. How dare you, sir?
Sorry.
What do you take me for? Some kind of optimist?
Dave!
Hello,
Ollie!
Hello. Welcome to Sustainababble 97.
97? Oh!
Yes?
Where the bloody hell have we been?
We've been on holidays. We've been on an excursion. We
Yes.
have been to that lovely Oxford, the city of dreaming spires. And we went to Oxford because we went to talk to somebody very, very special. Who was it, Dave?
We went to talk to only that George Monbiot. I know, off of The Guardian and off of books and off of talking and off of brains. He's been writing about the environment for years and years and years and years and years. He has a regular Guardian column. He is one of Britain's best known environmental campaigners, and he only gave us a bit of his time. Well, 2 bits of his time, didn't he?
Yeah, 2 bits of his time. Turns out there was a small logistical error, and George had to nip off in the middle of this interview to collect his daughter. But it was genuinely very, very good of him to come back and continue chatting to us, and we really, really appreciated it.
So this is great. We talked to George all about neoliberalism and what's wrong with it, and what to do about it, and the fact that we're all friends, really. And we talked about naked mole rats, and we talked about rewilding and how to do some mysterious thing to a mysterious place, but we don't know much more about it yet.
Very mysterious. All right, well, this is our interview with George, but before we do that, just the usual disclaimers. Ooh, this is new territory for me. We do work for environmental charities, but these are very much our views and not theirs. So if you've got any issue with what we say, take it up with us, or take it up with George. He's got a pretty thick skin, but I don't think you'll find much to disagree with in here, because this is a fantastic chat through a whole range of issues, and we very much hope you enjoy it. So, George, hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for giving us a bit of your time to talk to us today. For our listeners' benefit, please could you just give a little bit of an introduction, who you are, how you came to be doing what you're doing.
I'm George Monbiot. I'm an environmental campaigner, journalist, writer. I've always been just mad about the living world and deeply concerned about its destruction. I took my first environmental direct action when I was 8. And I've carried on since.
Excellent. So this is a really important interview for me, because when I was at university in Oxford, in fact, I read your book Poison Arrows, and me and my mate Ian said, this is great, this is what we want to do, let's go and find George Monbiot and ask him how we do what we want to do. And then we got distracted by the pub or something. But now, 13 years later, I found you. But I'm struck by how dramatically things have changed since you wrote that book, and I wonder how you feel when you look back on that time, both about the person you were but also the state of the world that you were writing about.
Yes, I have somehow retained some optimism. Probably because of my recognition that human beings are fundamentally good people. We're a good species. If we're allowed to be, our dominant characteristics are altruism, empathy, benevolence, community feeling. This is demonstrated by loads of experiments. We all have a bit of selfishness and greed in us, but it's way down the list. But somehow we keep trashing the living planet and trashing each other's lives. And I feel it's a system which drives us to behave in that way, a system which can be changed. So that's what keeps me going. But then there are other times when I feel profoundly pessimistic. I went to West Papua believing that by reporting what was going on, we could change it. We could make the case that what was happening there, the mass destruction of people and place, was immoral. It had to change, and therefore it would change, which now strikes me as quite a naive view. At the time, you had the great weight of geopolitics behind the Suharto dictatorship in Indonesia, which had occupied West Papua and was doing horrendous things to both the indigenous people there and to the astonishing, beautiful places where they lived. And the Suharto dictatorship was backed by the US, by the UK, by the whole West, by the World Bank, by the IMF, and such things as ethics and environmental concern just didn't stand a chance. In fact, even getting any traction in the media for these issues was almost impossible. And of course, I hadn't realised to what extent the media was a player. And to what extent it was part of the system of power and destruction.
So, we were having a look at your new book, which is called Out of the Wreckage, yes? Which is, you can tell people what it's about, but something I was really struck by in that book was talking about what's gone wrong is this sense of belonging somewhere. Which is something that I think I feel, and this sort of sense of a displacement. And do you want to explain a bit about how that maybe talks to environmental issues and what we can do about it?
The condition of our age is alienation. Alienation from our surroundings, from the living world, from each other, from ourselves. Ultimately, all the different forms of alienation that afflict us coalesce into psychic rupture and help to explain the shocking levels of mental health disorders that so many people now suffer. This is a condition which has been greatly exacerbated by the dominant ideology of our times, which is neoliberalism, which tells us that we should be apart, which creates a whole romantic lexicon of atomization. Individuals, right? Individuals, yes. We don't call people anymore. We say individuals. You can hardly read a newspaper article without seeing that word. And it's coming quite recently as a description of people. But we're lone rangers and soul traders and self-made men and women and self-starters and all. You can't complete a sentence without saying personal. Personally speaking, to distinguish myself from a ventriloquist dummy, I prefer personal friends to the impersonal variety and personal belongings to the kind which don't actually belong to me, but that's just my personal opinion, otherwise known as my opinion. And so we've all internalized and reproduced this dominant ideology, an ideology which says we should conceive of human relations as a market, that basically our engagement with other people should be transactional, and that the more selfish and greedy we are, the better it'll be for everyone, because that enables some people to rise to the top, become tremendously wealthy, and their wealth will trickle down to enrich everyone. And hasn't that worked out so well?
Trickled on from a great height.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and interestingly, the sort of founding text of all this, the central text of it, at least, is The Constitution of Liberty by Friedrich Hayek. Mm-hmm. It's really worth reading. It's completely insane. I mean, it's a totally mad, deranged philosophy. It's as mad as Ayn Rand, but he takes it seriously. And in there, he says, we ought to deplete resources. He talks about soil. He says that soil mining is something we should pursue because we should extract as much income as possible right now and then invest it in other places, because that will enhance economic growth, will enhance the wealth of what he calls the independents, the super wealthy people, and they are the pioneers who then lead the way for everybody to follow, and that's got to be a good thing for everyone. It doesn't quite specify how and why it's such a good thing for everyone, but it's got to be a good thing. So, we see things like soil mining and resource depletion as being bugs in the system. They're not, they're features. It's integral to this.
You've got to think for yourselves. You're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. I'm not.
Now, this system of alienation, which causes so many catastrophic impacts for us, has led to almost complete social atomization for many people. You know, here we are in a world of 7 billion people, and many have no friend to talk to, no one to confide in. It's an amazing thing. Such a crowded planet and such atomized people. And everybody has a fundamental need for belonging. Belonging is essential. And if we don't answer that need with inclusive and generous communities, it will be answered by other means. And Hannah Arendt pointed out that out of an atomized society, fascism emerges. And what fascism is a craving for community. It's a craving for people to be part of something where people act as one. And it's very easy to attract people to that community because you tell them, you're going to be great, you're going to be dominant, you're going to be on top of society. And by coming together and marching as one with one banner and one uniform and one anthem, we are going to be the dominant people. And you get this great sense of belonging to something. And that is a sense we all crave. So basically, if we, the antithesis of an inclusive and generous belonging is not no belonging. We can't cope with no belonging. We can't survive with no belonging. It's a highly toxic form of belonging.
Trump belonging, right?
Well, that's certainly one expression of it. And so it's an imperative that we create a sense of belonging. And I don't think that sense of belonging can be properly met only through being part of an online community or a sort of global community of interest. Or it has to have a geographical element, and that has to be an inclusive geographical element. It doesn't matter where you come from, what your skin color is, what your beliefs are, what your inclinations are. It doesn't matter, but you should feel that in this particular place you call home, even if it's only for a year that you're living there, you belong there. You're part of the community. That community is something in which you happily engage, and it happily engages with you. And to make that happen, we need to do several things. One is to create a sort of participatory culture where community activities are the norm, where it's just entirely ordinary to do things together, such as eating together. And getting people together, like for the big lunch, which we hold in June in the UK, where you sort of shut off your street and put out the tables, hang up the flags and get people eating. This is absolutely fundamental to bringing people back together and creating that sense of geographical community.
So your book is obviously an expression of the need to do that in many ways, but what I'm not clear on is whether you feel that if those things are achieved, some of the huge planetary crises we face will necessarily be fixed. So does this community-centred or society fix climate change? Does it stop the depletion of natural resources? Does it bring back the insects, or do we need something else as well?
It's a necessary but insufficient condition. And the crucial part of the community aspect to this, and I'm not saying the community aspect of it solves everything, we have to apply change at the top as well as at the bottom, but the crucial part is the recovery of the commons. And we all talk about economics or politics as if the table of economics of the economy has only two legs. We talk about state and market. And if you're on the left, you say you want more state and less market. And if you're on the right, you say you want more market and less state. But there are actually four legs to this table. There are four pillars of the economy. There is the state, there is the market, there's the household, and there's the commons. And the commons is perennially neglected by almost everyone in economics, in politics, in public life. And the commons could be defined as a resource which is controlled and managed by a particular community, which then shares the product of that resource on an equal basis. The resource is inalienable, it can't be sold, it can't be given away, and it should be managed in perpetuity. And it also, commons consists of the rules and negotiations required to sustain that resource. So a commons the commons is not capitalism, is not communism. It's something entirely different. And it's not about trying to extract as much as you can today and hang the future. It's about trying to sustain that resource forever. So it is inherently an environmental option. And the destruction of the commons, like, for instance, the destruction of the great land commons through the enclosure movements, which have taken place for centuries now, where people being chucked off the land grabbed by one person or a few people, those were accompanied by massive environmental destruction all over the world. That when you kick the community off, you kick all the habitats off as well and turn it over to monoculture, because the community needs of polyculture. If people are surviving off the commons and it's meeting many of their needs and they're trying to manage it in perpetuity, they will have a polycultural approach to it, and they will be conserving its resources. But if you're just trying to manage it for profit, if you switch from a common system to a capitalist system, a market-based system, or for that matter to a state-based system, you are going to be mining those resources.
So as an example of where that's happened in UK, the Highland clearances and the Highlands.
It's interesting, we all talk about the Highland clearances. We've all heard of the Highland clearances. No one talks about the Lowland clearances, where far more people were actually kicked off. Really? And hardly anyone even talks about the enclosures in England, where it all kicked off. England was where the model was invented.
I think the thing that people get fussed about is that a fox is a small brown furry animal, very much like a dog. I don't think they'd be nearly so worried if it was a little four-legged car full of chips.
I've worked with indigenous people on 3 continents, and I've seen what happens to them when they lose their land. Total collapse of their community because they're scattered to the 4 winds, collapse of the environment, but also psychic collapse, that they fall apart. Succumb to alienation, to anomie, to alcoholism, to drug addiction, to a whole series of mental health disasters. Then I came back to Britain and I read John Clare's poems, including his enclosure poems. This peasant poet, this totally brilliant man, where, you know, his early poems describe the wonder and beauty of the wildlife, the habitats, the community, the people that he was brought up with, and then in mid-adulthood, enclosures turn up, sweep it all away. What happens? He becomes an alcoholic. He ends up dying in a lunatic asylum.
Up from behind the molehill jumps the hare, cheat of his chosen bed, and from the bank the yellowhammer flutters in short fears.
That's happened to all of us. That is our history worldwide. That's who we are. We are those indigenous people who've been displaced from the land. Doesn't matter where in the world we live. That's who we are. And we're still living with the legacy of that in this post-enclosure society. And because we don't understand that, we have failed to understand what the potential for both human and environmental restoration might be.
Where have all the flowers gone?
In your book, you say that humans are almost unique among mammals in having this tendency for cooperation stuff.
You said you weren't going to ask this question.
I want to ask it. Apart from the naked mole rat, tell us about the naked mole rat.
Yeah, so the naked mole rat is the only species which is as socially minded as we are, in that it's a eusocial mammal. It's got a social structure the same as the hymenopterans, the bees and the ants and the wasps, where it has a queen mole rat, and the sisters help to bring up the queen's babies. So it's a highly integrated social structure, but it's all kin related. And what's spectacular about humans is we have that highly social minds, but not confined to kin. That's the amazing thing, that it's not about genetic selection, and nor is our altruism reciprocal. If you give money to a homeless person, you're not expecting them to give you money back. This goes way beyond reciprocity, and it's something quite unique in that way in the animal kingdom. In terms of its degree, you find altruism elsewhere, but nothing like you see in human society.
Where have all the young girls gone?
Now, at this point, I've got to go and pick up my daughter. Really sorry about this. But I'll be as quick as I can. I'll dash back, and then we'll fit in as much as we can.
Where are you?
Yes, so at this point, George went off on his bicycle and left us behind in his house with cups of tea, and having rifled through his pants drawer, and we didn't really rifle through his pants drawer. He came back. We're very pleased to say he came back. He hadn't just gone to the pub to get away from us. So yeah.
No.
So,
and what with it being 2 PM, that would have been drastic, but understandable.
yeah, and just in time, because we wanted to ask him about, all of this stuff, what's going wrong. How do we make it right then? So we did.
The dream we started.
So George, you're back. Very good.
Mad cycle dash across town, but we did it. Yeah.
Very good. So before you went to pick up your little girl, you were talking about something that felt a bit like a revolution to me, or something that felt like a kind of a prospectus for engaging people much more with where they live and what they do and the environment around them and all of that stuff. So how'd you do that then? What are we going to do about it?
So I think there's two crucial elements here when it comes to community. One is building this participatory culture that I was talking about, and the sort of culture which starts to coalesce into what people call thick networks, the sort of thing that we've seen in Rotterdam, where in 6 years, 1,300 projects, many of them arising from a single initiative, have just transformed the whole face of the city. City with a lot of social problems, deindustrialised, very sort of isolated communities, and it's just amazing stuff has happened there. Really exciting, actually, and it's a model for a lot of other places. But at the same time, we need to ensure that communities have genuine power and genuine resources, and what that means is the commons, the great neglected sector of the economy. And to give you one example of how this can be done, and this relies on regime change at the top, which we can come on to in a bit. If we look at what happened after the Second World War, the effort of governments throughout much of the capitalist world was to break the power of patrimonial capital, of these tremendously rich economic elite which had basically knackered countries everywhere through the Great Depression.
It tells you what the new National Health Service is and how you can use what it offers. Hospitals and specialist services.
So when the US imposed 94% income tax, top level, and the UK imposed 98%, it wasn't just to try to harvest money, it was deliberately to try to break down that overweening economic and political power. But we're now back to levels of inequality worse than they were then. And it's not just income inequality, wealth inequality is even greater. And we need to break that power once more, because basically very little can happen. We're locked in until we do that. And so what I see as being a crucial element of this is land value tax, is taxing that tremendously concentrated source of wealth, which is in the hands of a very small number of people and is used to hold the rest of society ransom. So we, people paying 20%, 30%, 50% of their income in rent so that other people don't have to work. The landlords don't have to do any work at all. They just sit there and harvest the money that other people are slaving away to make in often desperate situations, especially in the global capitals such as London. And so we tax that land value. It's because, the great majority of the price of housing is the speculative value of the land that underlies it. And that's what the landlords are harvesting. That's what we should be taxing. And the great thing is they can't move their land to Panama or to the Cayman Islands. And then that does two things. First of all, it breaks their grip of economic power over the rest of society. This is the grip of the 0.1% who basically now run politics, run the economy, make sure that everyone dances to their tune. Secondly, it brings down the price of land significantly because it's no longer a lucrative speculative asset. Oh, and thirdly, it provides a great pool of money for the government to use. So what do we do with this money? Well, we use some of it to pay for public services, but the residue of this should go back to communities, distributed fairly across the country to communities, who would be encouraged to set up a commons trust to handle this money. So if we take the average urban community, sort of part of a borough, for instance, you say, right, here's a wodge of money. Now, you can use this pretty well as you wish, but on commons principles, so it's shared equally, the rest of it. But we're going to encourage you perhaps to look in a particular direction, because we're going to give you the community right to buy, like they have in Scotland. And we're going to give you a community right to land assembly. So you're then sitting there as a community saying, well, what are our basic needs here? Oh, housing, yeah. Affordable housing. I don't mean affordable housing. Affordable housing.
Yes, you can actually afford.
Yeah, housing you can actually afford. And what do we have in this borough? Oh, look at that great big casino sitting there on this land. Oh, it's come up for sale. Do we need a casino more than we need affordable housing? Maybe not. So let's buy this land. And we'll knock down the casino and we create a site, building site. But we're not going to develop this ourselves. What we're going to do is go to the top people on the social housing list and say half the homes on this site will be for you, if you want them. You've got the option to put your names down for this. And then because you want a mixed development, you go to people who want to be owner-occupiers and private renters, and you say you put down a deposit and the other half can be allocated to you. And you people together are going to design the estate. Not just your own homes within the estate, but the whole estate.
Buy this house.
I can't afford it.
Buy it.
Look, I have to speak to the bank.
Buy it.
Look, please, no.
Buy it.
Look, please don't make me.
Buy it.
Look, I beg you.
Buy it.
Look, stop it.
Buy it.
You can't do this.
Buy
This
it.
is really unfair.
Buy it.
Please.
Buy it.
I won't do it.
Buy it.
Okay.
Great! Let's go back to my office and sign the paperwork. Ooh, hiya.
What we see worldwide is that when people design their own estates, they're 100 times better than when the volume house builders turn up and say, here you are, like it or lump it, which means lump it. And the other thing you find is that for a couple of years before they move in, those people are going to be working together, forming a community. So when they move in as a community. You've already created that rich community of people who've been very closely involved with each other's lives because they have to make the estate work together. And then you, as the Commons Trust, well, you're now the Commons Land Trust because you own land. You're receiving rent, albeit at a lower level than the land was previously commanding, considerably lower from the social rental sector. And you are getting still some money from land value taxation distributed by the government. So what are you going to do with this money? Well, you might want to build some more, you might want to build some public amenities, or you might want to issue a local basic income on a shared and equal basis to everyone in that community. You can see the opportunities begin to proliferate.
So, George, you're talking about a universal, well, some sort of income that everybody gets in his community. That strikes me as something which is going to become essential as autonomy, as automation takes so many jobs, which we think it's going to do. Is that part of your thinking? Where does the kind of the rise of the robots and the fact that we're inventing something higher up the food chain than ourselves?
Don't get scared again.
Sorry, I get freaked out by this. But where does that come into your thinking? Is it about resisting that at all?
Well, look, it has to come into our thinking. You know, I mean, the robots are with us already. There's one in number 10 Downing Street.
I get frustrated. People use the term robotic about me during that campaign.
That must hurt.
I don't think I'm in the least robotic. As I say, what I really enjoy is getting out there.
Yeah, and we have to be aware of this reality. But is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Well, like any technology, it just depends how we use it and how it plays. It's not inherently good or inherently bad. It could free us up for a life of leisure, where the wealth we require is created without us having to work, or it could free the economic elite up to exploit us even further and play us against the robots and knock down wages and free them up to impose a life of near slavery on other people.
Breathe on.
It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
Basically, we have to grasp this. We can't just sit back and allow stuff to unfold. We have to say what we want, decide what we want from this shift, and use it to ensure that it delivers. Now, look, I think a basic income is one tool. It's a very useful tool. It's not going to solve everything. And again, it's another technology, if you like, which we have to be in control of, because otherwise it can be used in a really negative way. You know, the neoliberals, some of them love the idea of basic income because they say, right, we can do away with all social services, all public services, publicly provided. We're going to have one big voucher system. Everybody's got money now because they've got a basic income, so you're going to buy your services. And what it means is it's profoundly inequitable because, of course, you know, people at the bottom are much less able to buy services than people at the top. So, you know, you can have good basic income, you can have bad basic income, and we've got to create the policy framework which means it works for us.
There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy.
So, moving on from robots to something altogether more cheery and rooted, you've spoken a lot and written a lot in the past about rewilding, which I think many of our listeners will be familiar with, the concept. I'm really interested to know, how's it going? Are there examples in the UK and elsewhere of it starting to work? Can you tell us about that?
There's some really exciting stuff going on. Sadly, the most exciting stuff I can't talk about at the moment because there's some very delicate negotiations.
Are you releasing things illegally into places they shouldn't be?
No, it's not that, and I don't know anyone who's doing any such thing. No, this is actually an entirely different thing. It's a very serious project, bringing in sort of all the relevant people in the region, but it's completely below the radar and not.
He's put wolves somewhere, haven't he? He's put wolves somewhere.
But when it does happen, it's going to just be transformative, and people will think, "Wow, that's what we were talking about." So it's really. I'm not directly involved in it. I just keep in close touch with what's happening. So. But there's a lot of great stuff. I mean, there's pre-existing projects, some of which are fantastic, like the Borders Forest Trust in the sort of English-Scottish border, and Trees for Life in the Scottish Highlands, doing really fantastic stuff. There's a lot of reintroduction taking place of some of it official, some of it less so. Beavers, pine martens. So even in this most zoophobic of all nations, which is how I see Britain, things are beginning to shift. But I feel we need to go a lot further. And of course, the key to a lot of this is diet, because actually it's livestock farming which prevents rewilding, prevents recovery and restoration of the living world. It is a most phenomenally wasteful land use. We eat, on average, global average, 81 grams of protein per day. Livestock farming, grazing, occupies twice as much land as all the cropland and produces 1 of those grams.
God.
It's just extraordinary. It's like these huge tracts of the Earth's surface, denuded by livestock, which are a fully automated system for environmental destruction. You just have to release them, and there's no trees. There's hardly any.
It's not the robots I need to be scared of. It's the sheep.
Yeah, they are the robot destroyers.
A robot in a sheep's clothing all this time,
but not as bright. The world has basically been sheep wrecked and cow trashed. This is the driving force. We talk a lot about climate breakdown, as well we should, but it's actually the third of our massive predicaments, and the first two are our treatment of the land and sea for food production. These actually have far greater impacts so far than climate breakdown, and threaten far more rapid collapse even than climate breakdown does. So, UNFAO says at current rates of soil loss, we have 60 years of harvest left. And that's it, that's curtains. There's no negotiation with that. Civilizations survive war, famine, plague, loss of soil, no coming back. That's it.
And I imagine year 58 and 59 aren't particularly great of those 60 years.
No, it's not a happy trajectory. No. So the key here is really a radical change of diet. And, I've been advocating this for a while, and the shift is happening in countries like the UK pretty fast. Sort of look at the number of vegans; it's just rising almost exponentially at the moment.
Too much chow, I will never call you a cow. I respect you and cows.
Don't use cow as an insult.
If you eat...
But we need to shift faster. I mean, on current trajectories, the human population is rising at 1.2% a year, livestock population 2.4% a year, and that means 4 times the extra livestock biomass than by 2050 than the extra human biomass. That's the real population crisis. You want to look at the population of livestock, and that's where we just have to shift. We have to change. And the promise that Rewilding holds out is we could take this land which is being used ridiculously unproductively with this spectacularly awful ratio of destruction to production, producing hardly anything, destroying almost everything, and we could say we can do something really amazing here. A hopeful, positive environmental story of restoration and re-establishment.
So sometimes in your columns, what you write for The Guardian, you're a bit of a miseryguts, if you don't mind me saying so, George. And that's all right.
At least sometimes. How dare you, sir? Sorry. What do you take me for? Some kind of optimist.
But yet when you read your books and you talk to you, there is, you mentioned it at the start, I think you're fundamentally an optimistic guy. So how do you square those things? Where do you sit? Do you sort of oscillate between despair and optimism? And how do you keep yourself optimistic on a day-to-day basis?
I'm optimistic about what we are and pessimistic about what we do. There's been this sort of revolution in the understanding of human nature over the past 20 years or so. Findings in neuroscience and psychology and anthropology and evolutionary biology all point to the fact that we are overwhelmingly altruistic, empathetic, beneficent, and community-minded. Those are our primary values. Experiment after experiment shows this. Selfishness and greed are in there, but they're much lower down. So what we are is fantastic, but what we do is really shit. And what we do is governed by the system in which we live. Not just the economic and political system, but also the cultural setting. Brilliant book, Jeremy Lent, called The Patterning Instinct, which shows how culture shapes our cognitive pathways, and often in disastrous ways. And that, in a way, is almost a primary thing. That we're in this toxic culture which pushes us in the wrong direction again and again. And so when I look at that and what it's doing, I say we're in a bad place. When I look at who we are and what we could do, we're in a pretty good place.
I was listening to the news the other day. They have a fat politician who had the nerve to say...
George, thank you so much for giving us your time and for fitting us round your family life as well. We hugely appreciate it.
I'm sorry about the slight interruption in the middle.
Not at all. People will, I'm sure, want to hear more from you. What's your Twitter handle? How else can they?
Yes, it's at George Monbiot. You can, I've got my Guardian articles. I also put them on my website, which is monbiot.com. And I'm out there making a noise most days, one way or another.
I also love the idea that there's a single one of our listeners that won't already know how.
Yes, it's George Monbiot stuff.
Thanks, George.
Thank you very much.
Farewell to the heather and the gold land. They cleared us off once and they do it all again.
So, there you go then, Dave.
Go.
That is a genuine ambition that I've held for many, many years, to go and meet and talk to and listen to George Monbiot, and what a treat. What an honour.
Do you really get you started on all this then? Is the babble George Monbiot's fault?
Yeah, give or take. Me and my mate Ian was sitting around drinking tea, not doing anything useful, reading that book of his, and it made a lot of sense. And we thought, wow, how do we go and do what George Monbiot does? And the answer was, be George Monbiot. Don't be too lay about music students. But it sowed a seed, and I definitely think you can trace a lot of it back to then.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you so much to George for your time. Thank you to Arabella for reading out the poetry that you heard in the middle of that. And thank you, as always, to the legendary Dickie Moore for the music that starts and ends and intertwinkles this here podcast.
If you want to get in touch with us at any stage, you can send us an email by emailing hello@sustainababble.fish, or find us on Twitter @thebabblewagon, or just search Facebook for Sustainababble.
Right, you are. Jolly good. So we shall be back next week. In the meantime, stop picking your teeth. I can see what you're doing. And I'll talk to you next week. Yes?
Yes, well, I wasn't picking my teeth exactly, but yeah, no. I mean, carry on.
Ooh, then what were you doing? Bye.
Bye.
Summer Evening by John Clare. The frog, half fearful, jumps across the path, and little mouse that leaves its hole at eve nimbles with timid dread beneath the swath. My rustling steps awhile their joys deceive, till past, then the cricket sings more strong, and grasshoppers in merry mood still wear the short night weary with their fretting song. Up from behind the molehill jumps the hare, cheat of his chosen bed, and from the bank